Welcome to See Beneath Your Beautiful, where guests share stories of adversity and perseverance, which inspire, encourage, and challenge us. We embrace these tough conversations, intimately exploring our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness.
Hi, I'm Terry Tucker. I am the founder of Motivational Check, the author of Sustainable Excellence, and for the last 10 years, a cancer warrior.
Do you want to talk about all the things you've gone through?
Yeah. 2012, I'm a girls' high school basketball coach in Houston and had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my third toe. And initially didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. Mm-hmm. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you got a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I said, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally, he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen this form of cancer. You have a rare form of melanoma, which we all kind of think is a skin disease, something too much exposure to the sun. He said, but you have a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And because your cancer is so incredibly rare, he recommended I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston to be treated. And so I did. I had tumor excised on the bottom of my foot. I had all the lymph nodes in my groin removed. And then when I healed, my doctor put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to help keep the disease from coming back. The side effects of the interferon were that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years.
Right.
And that wasn't a cure. That was, as my oncologist said, we're just trying to kick the can down the road and buy you more time for more therapies to become available. 2017, I ended up in the intensive care unit because of the toxicity of the interferon. And so I had to stop it. And almost immediately, the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it had presented 5 years earlier. That necessitated my foot being amputated in 2018. Melanoma worked its way up my leg into my shin in 2019, requiring 2 more surgeries. And then in 2020, an undiagnosed tumor kind of in my ankle area grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the pandemic was to have my left leg amputated. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm being treated for now. And I know this sounds like a very dark and ugly story, and it certainly has been, but I'll tell you this much, cancer has made me a better person.
Was there something about a SWAT team?
I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. I was a police officer in Cincinnati, Ohio. I did several jobs. One was an undercover narcotics officer. I was also a SWAT team hostage negotiator or a crisis negotiator. That was a lot of fun as well.
Okay. I didn't mean to jump away from cancer. So you're currently being treated.
I'm involved in a clinical trial of a drug that more than likely will not save my life, but very well may save the life of, somebody 5 years, 10 years down the road who I don't even know based on all the data, all the blood work, all the scans and things like that the doctors are doing with me. And I also played basketball from the time I was 9 years old all the way up through college. And I think one of the things that team sports taught me was the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. And you realize on a team that if you're not doing your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you're letting your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, et cetera. And if you think about it, the biggest team game I think that we all play is this game of life. So I kind of look at it as, well, it may not save my life, but hopefully this drug down the road will save somebody else's life.
Do you have a family? Do you have wife and kids?
My wife and I have been married for 28 years. We have one daughter who's 26 years old. She's married and lives in Florida now.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate your vibrancy and your attitude. How does your wife feel about your attitude?
It's infectious in a lot of ways. Instead of, kind of moping around the house and things like that, I do podcasts. I do a lot of things on my off weeks of treatment. It's a 3-week cycle, a week of treatment, and then 2 weeks off, and then another week of treatment. And I remember when I graduated from college, my father was dying of cancer, and he had an end-stage breast cancer back in the 1980s. And for a man, they really didn't know how to treat that. They pretty much told him to go home and die. But I think one of the things that allowed him to live another 3.5 years was that he had a purpose in life. He was in real estate. He worked up to 2 weeks before he died. Mm-hmm. I always remember that. And I sort of tucked it away in the back of my mind. So when this presented itself, I realized that I had to do something with my life. I couldn't just, sit around and think about all the things that could go wrong or, watch TV all day. And so I've done things. I've written a book. I've gotten involved in with podcasting. From my wife's perspective, it certainly makes her understand that, I've got something to do. She doesn't have to take care of me 24/7, although pretty much in a lot of ways she does. Mm-hmm. And I think cancer tends to isolate us from our family and our friends. And certainly the interferon did that. When I was on the interferon, I was sick all the time. I was so sick of being sick that I begged God to die. It's like, just take me. I'm so sick of this, but God didn't take me. And I've got a great family. And I always talk about what's gotten me through this, or what I call my 3 Fs, which are faith, family, and friends. And my family has been a huge part of getting me through these last 10 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. My mom passed away from cancer as well at 46. You were saying that it isolates you. And I know that's true. I've talked to a lot of people now about hard subjects that do isolate. Somebody lost their child and it's hard to know what to say. What do you wish people would say to you? Or how do you wish they would approach you? Or do you just wish they would approach you instead of ignoring the subject?
I sort of force the issue sometimes. And this is going to sound really weird. I have fun with cancer. When I had my leg amputated, when I had my foot amputated, I was walking is not the right word, but walking out of the hospital, and I was limping and that. And there was a woman off in the distance, and she was staring really hard at me. And, I thought, was it me? And there was nobody else around. So I knew it had to be me. And when I got up to her, she kind of followed me the whole way as she was turning her head. And when I got up to her, I looked at her and I said, "Oh, don't worry, it'll grow back." And I just kept walking. And she got this look on her face like, will it really grow? What am I, a salamander here or something like that? So I had fun with it in that regard. What bothers me more than anything is when people come up to me and they hear about my journey and they're like, Terry, I could never do what you did. And that drives me crazy. And if I'm in a smart aleck mood, and occasionally I am, I'll say to them, yeah, you're right. You couldn't, because you've already decided in your own mind that you can't do this. Right. Why would you start anything? Why would you get into anything with a mindset that says I'm going to fail, that I'm not going to be able to handle this? I generally try to put people at ease. People are uncomfortable, especially when they say I don't have a leg and, I'm in a wheelchair and things like that. And before I had my leg amputated, I was 6'8" tall, and now I'm pretty much in a wheelchair. So, I was looking over everybody's head now. Now I'm looking at everybody's rear ends. So, it's a whole different perspective on life.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I just wish you'd come up and talk to me, give me a hug or something like that, because that means a lot to me. And don't be afraid. I'm not contagious. I'm not going to bite or anything like that. So yeah, just come up and say hi.
Speaking about people in wheelchairs, which would you prefer, somebody to get down to your level or just stand up and talk to you? That's I've often
stand up
wondered.
And talk to me is fine. Because I still have one good leg. I can stand up. It's not like I have no feeling in that. So, and just act like it's, like you would with you or anybody else. I just happen to be in a wheelchair.
Right. Isn't that the truth? That is like just plain and simple. And yet it for some reason, it's so scary. Is it just, you think people are facing their own fears? Obviously. What else could it be?
I think it is. And there's such a dichotomy, because I have small children who live in the neighborhood where my wife and I live. And, when I'm out in my wheelchair and sometimes if I have crutches or stuff like that, they'll want to get in the wheelchair and wheel themselves around the neighborhood. To them, it's not scary. It's not foreign. It's not something to fear. But for adults, it's like, ooh, you're in a wheelchair. That's uncomfortable for me to deal with. So
Yeah.
It's just fun to watch kids have a good time with it, whereas adults are so worried about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Have you always been a positive person?
I'm not going to say always. And even now, I'm not always positive. I have bad days. There are days I cry, there are days I feel down. And one of the ways I look at it is this. We're all going to experience pain in our life. And it doesn't have to be cancer pain or chronic illness or anything like that. It could be, you break up with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You don't get the promotion at work that you think you deserve. You have a fender bender on the way to church, whatever it ends up being. We're all going to experience pain. Pain is inevitable. Suffering, on the other hand, suffering's optional. Suffering's what you do with that pain. Do you use it to make you a stronger and more determined individual? Or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself and want other people to feel sorry for you? People look at me like, oh, you're tough. You can handle it. I could never do that. You can do that. I am the biggest wimp in the world. So if I can do this, believe me, anybody can. It's just a mindset. We're so conditioned. Our brains want to avoid pain and discomfort and seek pleasure. But, the only way you're going to grow, the only way you're going to get better, the only way you're going to improve in your life is if you step outside of that comfort zone and do things that make you uncomfortable. I try to do this every day of my life, even now. Do one thing every day that makes you nervous, that scares you, that is potentially embarrassing, that makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but if you do those small things every day, when the big things in life hit us, and I've lost my father, you've lost your mother, we lose somebody close to us, we lose our job, we're living out of our car. We've all heard the stories. If you do those small things, when the big things in life hit us, you'll be so much more resilient to handle.
I think it's really asinine thing to say, actually, that I couldn't handle it. Because what else would you do? What choice do you have?
It's a very short-sighted statement.
Yeah.
You don't know what you can do. You really don't know who you are until you've been tested by adversity.
Exactly.
So many people aren't. And so many people just take the easy way out and it's relaxing. I'm not going to do anything to push myself or to do anything that's uncomfortable. And then when those big things in life hit, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to curl up in a ball. And it's like, no. When I found out I had cancer, I think I went through every single emotion that we associate with grief.
Yeah.
I was in denial. It's like, no, I've done everything right in my life. This can't be. I was mad. I bargained with God. I did everything. And then I just got to a point where it was like, well, this sucks. I'm going to have to embrace the suck and just play the cards that I've been dealt to the best of my ability. Don't know where this is going. When I was diagnosed, they didn't give me 5 years. And again, whenever doctors say that to people, I always tell them like, look, yeah, I get it. The doctor's going based on statistical data that he or she understands. What the doctor doesn't know and doesn't understand, the doctor doesn't know your heart. The doctor doesn't know your resolve. The doctor doesn't know that, hey, your daughter's getting married in 2 years. And by God, you're going to be here for that event. Mm-hmm. When you factor that in, It doesn't matter if they tell you got 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever. They don't know you. And so don't get too excited when they give you, sort of your end date or your expiration date.
Tell me about the book you wrote.
So the book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And it was really a book born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached who'd moved to the Colorado area where my wife and I live. And one night we had dinner with her and her fiance. And after dinner, I remember saying to her, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she's like, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth and then living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media and ask me what I thought were the most important things that he should learn to not just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. Not that those aren't important. They are extremely important. But I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. I thought about it for a while and I was taking notes. And eventually I had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I kind of stepped back and I was like, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the 3-month period after I had my leg amputated, in 2020, and I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs. Every day while I was healing, I sat down at the computer and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
Seems like you are fulfilling your purpose. That's why I do this podcast, which is just really a passion project, a heart project. Been through some shit, and I want others to know that there's hope at the end.
There is.
You can go through stuff. The second person I interviewed before I really knew what I was doing was a girl, a 19-year-old who was suffering from schizophrenia. And I had photographed her, and I was so amazed by her willingness and desire. She had asked me to photograph what it feels like to struggle with schizophrenia. But when I interviewed her, I realized that she is not on the other side. She's still suffering and suicidal sometimes. And I didn't know what to say to her. And so that's how the purpose of the podcast came about, was that what could we tell her to get her to the next day, like somebody just struggling? I interviewed a 38-year-old man who's never taken a step in his life. He has a degenerative disease. What would you say to somebody who's suffering with something that's real to them? You know, they're not on where you're at, and you still have a positive attitude, I guess is my point.
You make a good point. And I guess the way I look at that is go back to even before, people that have illnesses, injuries, degenerative diseases and things like that. A lot of times we are always, I want to be like him, or I want to be like her, or I'm comparing myself to him, or I'm comparing myself to her. And we shouldn't do that. I don't understand why, especially in today's society when it's all about me. What do you care what that person thinks? Why do you care what they think? If there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be things you didn't do. So why do you care whether your neighbor or your classmate or somebody at the office thinks, you're ugly or you're stupid or you don't wear the right clothes? I don't care about those people. The other thing is, when you sort of get into illnesses and diseases and things like that, we all suffer in our own way. And so I try not to say, I'm suffering more than him, but she's suffering more than me. Pain is inevitable. Suffering's optional. Suffering's what you do with that pain.
Right.
Do you take it and use it to make you a stronger person? Or do you feel sorry for yourself? Do you wallow in it? Do you, woe is me? I get into those dark days as well. There's no S on my chest. I don't wear a cape or anything like that. But when I do, what I find is that when we're down, we're depressed, we're looking inward. It's all about me. I feel bad for myself. And a way, at least I found, to get outside of that is to look outward. I can always, especially when I'm at the hospital, I can always find somebody who's worse off than I am and go up to them and say, hey, how's it going? How's your day been? Did you see the hockey game last night, the basketball game, whatever? Just start a conversation. Just make a connection with another human being. So I think that's incredibly important. And one of the chapters in my book, one of the principles is this. Most people, and I'm guilty of this too, most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. We do that. We get to a point where, I'd like to do that. Scares me a little bit. What are people going to say about me? Or, I don't know if I'm smart enough to, start that business or whatever. Again, I go back to just do it. Just jump in and see what happens. You'll figure it out as you go. You will make mistakes. You will do all that kind of stuff. But the road to success is paved with mistakes.
Right.
Was paved with failure. And so don't think that I'm going to fail. And who cares? Who cares if you fail? You're only a loser. If you lose on the scoreboard, you're only a loser if you don't learn something or if you start to blame somebody else. So I love the Nelson Mandela quote of, I never lose. I either learn or I win. Look at it that way and then go for it.
Right. I just learned that last week.
Which one? The Mandela quote?
Well, not that quote, but I love that quote. But that all of your mistakes are things you've learned, not failures.
Right.
I'm 54. I don't know why that took a long time to learn.
But you learned it.
But now I know. And now it's a real different way to look at, there's the 30s where there was multiple errors in my life. And so it's nice to just go, well, those were all learning curves. And they really were. I have learned from them. So that's good.
And that's what's important. I mean, all of us make mistakes. All of us, things don't take that we think, this is going to be the greatest thing in the world. And that's okay. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you any less of the woman that you are. It's just, you learn something. I tried it. It wasn't successful. Okay. That's all right. Doesn't make you a bad person.
Right. I really love that. And I actually appreciate you reminding me that I was comparing sicknesses. If people are suffering harder or worse, it doesn't matter, whatever you're suffering from. So
yeah, we all suffer in our own way. Yeah.
Thank you for that reminder, because we're all just on this journey together.
We are. I had a nurse who asked me, what was it like to have your foot amputated? What was it like to have your leg amputated? I said, it has not been easy. It's been a little over 2 years since I had my leg amputated. I'm still learning how to walk with a prosthetic. At 6'8", falling is not an option. You're going to get hurt if I do that. So I don't trust my prosthetic leg enough. And that's my issue. And I'm going to have to deal with that. But cancer can take all my physical faculties. But cancer can't touch my mind. It can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. This is just a vessel or a house or whatever you want to call it to house who we really are. So, the physical part of us, not really important. It is to a point, but it's not who you are. And so many people get hung up on, I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. You are. In 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You may have seen it. It was a huge blockbuster. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were two living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not just made up characters for the movie. And Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card sharp. Mm-hmm. And Wyatt Earp, his entire adult life, had been a lawman. And somehow these two men from entirely opposite backgrounds formed this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. And the real Doc Holliday died at that sanitarium, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, he has no job, there's no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the two men pass the time that way. And in this almost final scene in the movie, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was younger, but she joined a convent over the affair, but she's all that I ever wanted. And then Doc looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life, and get on with living yours. You and I probably both know people out there, even people listening to us, that are sort of sitting back and be like, well, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. Or when this occurs, I'll have a successful life. Or when that arises, I'll have a significant life. I guess what I'd like to leave you with is this. Don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you were put on the face of this earth, use your unique gifts and talents, and live that reason. Because if you do, at the end of your life, I'm going to promise you two things. Number one, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
I really appreciate that. I went to a conference in 2019, and they sparked my desire to do photography again, which then sparked my desire to do this podcast. And I just really feel like I'm in my purpose. And I was 51 at the time. You can just start whatever your heart is telling you to do. Well, this was a really special interview. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
I enjoyed talking with you, and it's nice people like you that allow me to come on, and hopefully between our conversation, we make a difference in somebody's life. And if we do, today's been a good day.
The truth is, I'm a little choked up, but you've made a difference in mine. So I guess that's all that matters.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that very much. That makes me feel good. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of See Beneath Your Beautiful, hosted by Hara Allison. And thanks for your ratings and reviews. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Stay tuned.